Kirk Douglas lived to be 103 years old, long enough to bury almost every star he ever worked with. And in that time, he saw things behind Hollywood's golden curtain that would make your stomach turn. While cameras were rolling and flashbulbs were popping, the biggest names in old Hollywood were quietly destroying the people closest to them. Stealing husbands, sabotaging Oscar nights, feeding names to the government, and ending careers with a single phone call. Kirk didn't just witness it, he lived it. He survived it. And in his best-selling autobiography, The Ragman's Son, he pulled back the curtain on a Hollywood where your closest friend could put a knife in your back before you even knew the blade was out. From Oscar nights sabotage to government witch hunts, from stolen husbands to careers buried in silence. These are the 9 stars who secretly destroyed their friends' careers in old Hollywood Golden Age history. And number 8 on this list committed a betrayal so devastating, so unforgivable that half of Hollywood refused to speak his name with anything but contempt for almost 50 years. Number 9. Olivia de Havilland. Most people remember her as the sweet Melanie from Gone with the Wind, but behind that gentle image was a woman locked in one of the most vicious rivalries Hollywood has ever seen. And it was with her own flesh and blood. Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine were real biological sisters. Both became major stars during Hollywood's golden age. And in 1942, they made history by being nominated for the exact same Oscar, Best Actress. It remains the only time 2 sisters have ever competed against each other for the award. Joan Fontaine won that night for her role in Alfred Hitchcock's Suspicion, and when she walked toward the stage, she reached out to embrace her older sister. Olivia pulled away right there in front of the entire audience, in front of every important person in the industry. She refused to congratulate her own sister on the biggest night of her career. That moment set the tone for decades of bitter warfare between them. When Olivia won her own Oscar 4 years later, for 2 each his own, the rivalry only deepened. Joan would later claim in multiple interviews that Olivia systematically worked behind the scenes to undermine her with studios and directors, using her industry connections and her seniority as the older sister to quietly freeze Joan out of roles she deserved. Joan's career declined through the 50s, while Olivia's continued to flourish. They stopped speaking entirely, not for months, not for years, for decades. Both sisters died without ever reconciling. Joan passed in 2013. Olivia followed in 2020 at the age of 104. A lifetime of shared blood, shared talent, and shared history, but not a single moment of shared peace. Kirk Douglas knew both women personally. They were all part of the same Golden Age royalty, and he understood exactly how personal vendettas could quietly strangle a career in a town where everyone whispered behind closed doors. Number 8. Burt Lancaster. Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster were one of Hollywood's most iconic screen pairings. They made 7 films together over nearly 4 decades, starting with I Walk Alone in 1948 and ending with Tough Guys in 1986. To the public, they looked like 2 friendly rivals pushing each other to greatness on screen. Behind the scenes, the dynamic was far less charming. Lancaster demanded top billing in every single one of their 7 collaborations. Every single time, and he got it without exception. Kirk wrote directly in his autobiography that they were, in his own words, not particularly compatible in real life. Industry insiders described Lancaster as a professional shark who took no prisoners when it came to business. He used his imposing physical presence, his leverage with studio executives, and his ruthlessly aggressive negotiating style to dominate every collaboration they shared. Kirk could steal scenes from Lancaster on camera with his raw intensity, but off camera, Burt consistently held the upper hand in deal-making, billing, negotiations, and studio politics. That constant positioning as the second name took a real toll over the years. Kirk Douglas was nominated for 3 Academy Awards throughout his career and never won a single competitive Oscar. Meanwhile, Lancaster took home the statue for Elmer Gantry in 1960. Kirk eventually received only an honorary Oscar in 1996. Decades after many in the industry believed he should have won one outright. He outlived Burt by 26 years, Lancaster passing in 94, long enough for Kirk to have the final word. And he used every page of his books to make sure people understood what really happened between them. Number 7. Elizabeth Taylor. In the 1950s, Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds were genuine best friends. Not Hollywood best friends who smile for photographers and talk behind each other's backs. Real friends. They doubled regularly with their husbands. Taylor was married to producer Mike Todd. Reynolds was married to singer Eddie Fisher. The 2 couples were constantly together at premieres, dinner parties, and private gatherings. They were Hollywood's golden friendship. Then, in 1958, Mike Todd was killed in a plane crash. Taylor was devastated by the loss, and she turned to her best friend's husband, Eddie Fisher, for comfort and consolation. That consolation quickly became a full-blown affair. Fisher abandoned Debbie Reynolds and their 2 small children, one of whom was future star Carrie Fisher, and married Elizabeth Taylor in 1959, less than a year after Todd's death. Reynolds later described the horrifying moment she discovered the truth. She called Taylor's hotel room one evening. Eddie Fisher answered the phone. The scandal that erupted was the biggest Hollywood had seen in a generation. The entire world watched as one best friend publicly destroyed another woman's family and marriage. Reynolds was humiliated on a global stage. Fisher's career actually suffered the most in the long run because audiences saw him as the man who abandoned his wife and young children for his wife's best friend. And the truly cruel irony is that Taylor eventually left Fisher, too, for Richard Burton on the set of Cleopatra, proving that the entire devastating betrayal had been even more pointless than it already seemed. Kirk Douglas was close friends with Mike Todd. They were neighbors in Palm Springs. He wrote about Todd in his autobiography and understood intimately how one selfish act of betrayal could send shockwaves rippling through an entire Hollywood community for years. Number 6. Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock first noticed Tippi Hedren in a television commercial and immediately decided she would become his next great leading lady. He cast her in The Birds in 1963 and Marne the following year. She was being groomed as his new blonde muse, following in the footsteps of Grace Kelly and Kim Novak. But Hitchcock's obsession with his leading ladies ran far deeper than anyone on the outside could see. During production, Hitchcock began making aggressive and unwanted sexual advances toward Hedden when she firmly and repeatedly refused him. His behavior transformed from obsessive admiration into cold and calculated vindictiveness. Hitchcock kept Hedden locked into an exclusive personal contract for 2 full years after the completion of Marne. During that entire period, he refused to cast her in any project of his own. But here is the truly cruel dimension of his revenge. He also refused to release her from the contract, which meant no other studio or director could hire her either. She was completely trapped. Hollywood's most exciting new star, unable to work, unable to leave, unable to do anything but watch her career momentum evaporate day by day. By the time her contract finally expired, the industry had moved on to newer faces. Hedren never regained her position as an A-list star, despite being genuinely talented. Her daughter, Melanie Griffith, would later become famous in her own right. But Tippi's career was permanently stunted by one powerful man's wounded ego. Kirk Douglas understood this system deeply. He had fought against the stranglehold of studio contracts his entire career and eventually formed his own production company, Brina Productions, specifically to escape this kind of suffocating control. Number 5. Frank Sinatra. Peter Lawford was a core member of the legendary Rat Pack. Alongside Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Joey Bishop. He was also married to Patricia Kennedy, sister of President John F. Kennedy. That connection to the White House was precisely why Sinatra kept him close. Sinatra was utterly consumed by the glamour of presidential power, and Lawford was his direct bridge to it. In 1962, Sinatra spent a fortune preparing his Palm Springs compound to host the sitting president. He constructed a helipad, expanded guest quarters, and planned every detail with obsessive care. Then, at the very last minute, Attorney General Bobby Kennedy advised his brother to cancel the visit, citing Sinatra's widely known associations with organized crime figures. Kennedy stayed at Bing Crosby's estate instead, a Republican's home, which twisted the knife even deeper. Lawford was the one forced to break the devastating news to Sinatra. He was nothing more than a messenger. But Sinatra's fury was biblical. He took a sledgehammer to the helipad he had built with his own money. He shredded every photograph he owned of Lawford. Then he methodically set about erasing Lawford from his professional life. Lawford's role in the upcoming film Robin and the Seven Hoods was immediately stripped away and handed to Bing Crosby. Sinatra broadcast through every channel in Hollywood that Lawford was finished. Years later, when Lawford attempted to attend one of Sinatra's Las Vegas performances, hoping to make peace, Sinatra discovered he was in the audience and flatly refused to take the stage until Lawford was physically escorted from the building. The destruction was absolute and permanent. Lawford descended from A-list cinema to game show cameos and bargain bin productions. His marriage to Patricia Kennedy disintegrated by 1966. He fell into severe addiction, and he died broke at just 61 years old in 1984. His own children could not afford his funeral expenses. When he was finally laid to rest, it was only because a former manager stepped in to cover the costs. The man who once rubbed shoulders with presidents and performed alongside the most famous entertainers on earth was buried with almost nothing to his name, all because he delivered a message that Frank Sinatra did not want to hear. Number 4. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford and Bette Davis were the two towering female stars of Hollywood's golden age. Their rivalry spanned decades of competition, jealousy, and undisguised mutual contempt. The two women were brought together for Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a psychological horror film that brilliantly weaponized their real-life hatred to fuel performances that were terrifyingly authentic. The film was a smash hit. Bette Davis earned a Best Actress Oscar nomination for her ferocious performance. Joan Crawford was not nominated, and that snub drove her to the edge of obsession. Crawford devised one of the most coldly calculated acts of sabotage in the entire history of the Academy Awards. She secretly reached out to every other Best Actress nominee that year. She offered each of them the same proposition. If they won and could not attend the ceremony, she would graciously accept the award on their behalf. She was quietly setting a trap. On Oscar night, Anne Bancroft won for The Miracle Worker. Raftoft was performing on Broadway in New York and was not present at the ceremony. And Joan Crawford, with the look of absolute triumph on her face, swept onto that stage to accept the award. She glided past a visibly stunned B. Davis standing in the wings backstage and held that golden statue high for every camera in the room. Crawford spent the rest of the evening parading the Oscar in front of reporters and photographers, basking in the attention. While Davis could only watch from the shadows, the entire industry recognized it for what it was. Calculated, premeditated humiliation on the biggest stage in Hollywood. Number 3. Ronald Reagan. Before he became President of the United States, Ronald Reagan was a working Hollywood actor and the elected president of the Screen Actors Guild. As the head of the Actors Union, his colleagues placed enormous trust in him. He was supposed to be their champion, their advocate, the man standing between them and exploitation. What they did not know was that behind closed doors, Reagan was living a secret double life. He was quietly serving as an FBI informant designated by the Bureau as confidential source. T10. In private meetings with federal agents, Reagan fed them names of fellow actors, writers, and directors he suspected of harboring communist sympathies. These were his colleagues and peers, people who sat across from him at union meetings, people who trusted him with their professional futures. The information Reagan supplied helped feed the Hollywood blacklist, a devastating system that shattered hundreds of careers across the industry. People lost everything: their work, their income, their homes. Some fled the country entirely, seeking employment in Europe or Mexico. Others simply never worked again. And this is where Kirk Douglas enters the story in the most powerful way imaginable. Kirk watched the blacklist destroy brilliant, talented people all around him. He saw careers dissolve overnight. He watched families fall apart under the pressure, and he decided he would not stand by in silence. When Kirk produced Spartacus in 1960, he made a decision that changed Hollywood forever. He hired Dalton Trumbo, one of the original Hollywood 10, who had been imprisoned for refusing to name names. Trumbo had spent years writing under pseudonyms for a fraction of his true value. Kirk insisted that Trumbo receive full on-screen credit under his real name. That single courageous act is widely credited with shattering the Hollywood blacklist once and for all. Reagan helped build the machine that destroyed careers. Kirk Douglas dismantled it with his bare hands. Number 2. Kazan. This is the one I mentioned at the very beginning. The betrayal so severe that Hollywood's wounds from it were still bleeding half a century later. Kazan was the most sought-after director in both Broadway and Hollywood during the early 1950s. His films defined American cinema. A Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, East of Eden. He personally launched the careers of Marlon Brando, James Dean, and Warren Beatty. The man was untouchable. As a young artist, during the Depression, Kazan had briefly joined the Communist Party, as many intellectuals of that era had done. When the House Un-American Activities Committee demanded his testimony in 1952, Kazan stood at the absolute summit of American film. He initially refused to betray anyone in a closed session, but then the machinery of power closed in around him. Studio head Darryl Zanuck made it unmistakably clear that without cooperation, Kazan's film career would be terminated. So Kazan returned to the committee, and he named 8 of his former friends and collaborators. People he had worked alongside for years. People who had trusted him completely. The fallout was instant and catastrophic. Actress Phoebe Brand, one of the people Kazan named, would not appear in another film for 40 years. Other careers were destroyed overnight. Former friends began crossing the street to avoid him. His closest creative partner, Arthur Miller, ended their friendship permanently. Miller went on to write The Crucible, a play that stands as one of the most powerful condemnations of witch hunt mentality ever written. But Kazan was not done. He followed his testimony by making On the Waterfront, a celebrated film in which Marlon Brando achieves moral redemption by informing on corrupt figures around him. The film was widely interpreted as Kazan's attempt to use Hollywood's grandest stage to justify his own act of betrayal. The scar never faded. When the Academy awarded Kazan an honorary Oscar in 1999, almost 50 years after his testimony, 250 protesters gathered outside. Dozens of actors sat in stony silence in the auditorium, their hands deliberately still, while others applauded. Kirk Douglas was navigating this exact world during these exact years. He witnessed everything Kazan did, and where Kazan chose to sacrifice his friends to protect himself, Kirk chose the harder, braver road, putting his own career at risk to set things right. Number 1. Walt Disney. This is the name that shocks people the most. Walt Disney is arguably the most beloved figure in the history of entertainment. Uncle Walt, the man who gave the world Mickey Mouse, Snow White, and Disneyland. The warm, smiling face of imagination and childhood innocence. But behind that meticulously cultivated image was a man. who helped build the very machinery of career destruction that Kirk Douglas would later dismantle. In 1947, Disney eagerly testified as a friendly witness before the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was among the very first in Hollywood to cooperate. He used his testimony to specifically target the leaders of the 1941 Disney animators' strike, workers who had simply organized to demand fair wages and humane working conditions. Disney harbored a deep, bitter grudge against the strikers, and he weaponized a government committee to take his revenge, branding union organizers as dangerous subversives and helping lay the groundwork for the blacklist that would devastate the industry for over a decade. But there was something even more disturbing. In 1938, the Nazi regime's official filmmaker, Leni Riefenstahl, traveled to Hollywood seeking American distribution for her propaganda documentary. Every major studio in town refused to grant her a meeting. They shut their doors completely. The only prominent Hollywood figure who welcomed Riefenstahl was Walt Disney. He gave her a personal guided tour of his studio and previewed footage from his upcoming production of Fantasia. This meeting took place after the horrors of the Night of Broken Glass were already front-page news around the world. And then there were the films themselves. Racial caricatures appeared throughout Disney's animated features during this period. Offensive stereotypes were embedded in beloved children's entertainment, viewed by hundreds of millions. One particular film was so deeply problematic that Disney's own company eventually sealed it in the vault permanently, refusing to ever release it for home viewing. Disney built his empire on the image of warmth and wholesomeness while quietly enabling systems of persecution and prejudice that caused real harm to real people. Kirk Douglas once said that you can be a terrible person and be enormously talented, and you can be the kindest soul alive and have no talent whatsoever. He understood that old Hollywood was a place where ability alone could never protect you, where a warm handshake at a premiere could disguise a plot to destroy everything you had built, where the person sitting beside you at dinner might be the same person whispering your name to the authorities. These 9 stars proved that the most dangerous people in Hollywood were never the ones who openly despised you. They were the ones who called you their dearest friend. And Kirk Douglas, the ragman son from the poorest streets of Amsterdam, New York, who clawed his way to the top of an industry designed to chew people up and spit them out.